Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Marketing Detective Podcast. We're so glad that you found us in the podcast universe. Today, we are talking all things QR codes. What are they? How are they being used? They've been around since 2010, 2011, 2012, but back then you needed a QR reader to use them. Now, with the sophistication of the latest smartphones, it's a scan and you're on your way to a QR code access point. That's our focus today, QR codes. One of the things I enjoy is reading your email address, your emails about topic ideas. And this one has been chomping at the bit. There have been so many people who have asked us to talk more about QR codes just because there's just so much to know about them, to learn from them, and how local businesses can grow their business and get higher levels of engagement. And so we decided to dedicate this episode to QR codes. My guest today is, in full disclosure, a fellow employee of Nexstar Media Group. She's also a good friend of mine, Meghan Glenn, who is our digital sales manager at WGN in Chicago. That's right, News 9, the legendary station in Chicago. Meghan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mitch. I'm super excited.
That's right. And she's coming to you from the historic office right there in the WGN. And right above her is the studios for actually down the hall, not upstairs, that's their offices, is the News Nation headquarters. So very exciting stuff going on in the building. So Meghan, before we kind of dive into QR codes, share a little bit about your journey of how you got to this legendary television station.
Absolutely. So I got my start in media actually as a digital account executive for the Record Journal Publishing Company in a tiny town called Meriden, Connecticut. I learned digital there basically from the ground up, started selling things like SEO and SEM and targeted display, and really kind of with our team there ended up making a lot of headway in a fairly small market at kind of the time when digital was first becoming accessible to small and mid-sized businesses. So it was a really exciting time to kind of join the industry. And, from there, I kind of worked around kind of Western Connecticut too. I made the transfer over to Digital First Media, also as a DSM there, working for another publication. And I actually went over to the agency side a little bit. And then when I came back from that, I made the leap over into broadcast with WNEP in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Definitely a legacy station there. Learned all there was to know about digital and broadcast, or especially not all there was to know. That's definitely a gross overstatement. I feel like I'm still learning every day. But coming from Scranton, I actually received the opportunity to relocate up to WGN in Chicago. And I've been here for 4.5 years now, and it's been just the most amazing ride. And one of the things that's been so exciting about my career is really kind of finding myself growing more in depth in this digital space and evolving with the industry has just been so exciting, especially because of the evolution of broadcast and how kind of platform agnostic our industry has become. It's been really exciting. So here we are.
Well, I will tell you, I've had the privilege of working with you. I guess it's since October of 2019 is when, when you guys became part of the Nexstar family. And I was told by a number of people, not just in your building, but within the organization, that you were one of the most talented, one of the most innovative folks that were joining the company. And I was excited to get to work with you. And boy, were they correct. You are such an innovator. We're going to talk a little bit about I'm going to brag on you a little bit about some of the things that you've done. But before we get to that, You and I have a connection, and that's Abilene, Texas. And I went to
I
school.
know.
So tell us what you did in Abilene. I know that had nothing to do with television or digital.
Yes. So the year I graduated college, I think I did that thing that everybody does where they're like, I have no idea what I want to do with my life, and I'm going stir crazy in my hometown. So I packed up and I moved to Abilene, Texas, of all places, from my hometown in Connecticut.
Nobody says I'm going to move to Abilene, Texas
No, it was
on
definitely
purpose.
all of the things had to align correctly for that to happen. I had somewhere to stay, and I had a job waiting for me. I
Hmm.
actually worked for a rental car company that I will leave unnamed, but everybody knows it. And I mean, realistically, that's kind of where I first kind of dipped my toes into sales,
Mm.
and um, the thing that was interesting about my time in Abilene was that it was fairly short. I think I was there for about 9 months, but it was like deeply formational for I think the rest of my career, and
Mm.
mostly it was just because I found my legs with you know, working to find a solution with somebody. That's always been kind of my brand of selling, I suppose, is really kind of meeting somebody's needs or walking them through a solution. And I really did dip my toes in my first position,
Mm.
even though it's so different from our current industry. That's kind of what got the ball rolling, I suppose.
Well, one of the things that I've always enjoyed about your approach is you are very conversational. You know the analytics, you know the technology, uh, but you don't talk over people's heads. You really kind of make it simple for them to understand, make it very clear for them to want to buy into this idea, this concept. And we both are all about ideas are the new currency. It's about that's a Perry Sook quote, by the way. I don't take that out of context. But it really is true. I mean, people buy ideas, they get excited about ideas. And speaking of that, um, before we get into QR codes, let's talk just a moment about point of entry, which has been a game changer for us at Nexstar. Tell us how you came up with this idea. And I remember you calling me going, I have this crazy idea. What do you think?
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, so the thing that's been really interesting about working in media, we talk about being cross-platform and having so many different irons in the fire, I suppose, as a media company. We
Mm.
have social, and we have, we're working so hard on our organic Google ratings, and just all of these things that kind of drive traffic to us in different ways. And I actually had a client at one point mention, that they wanted kind of a better answer to the homepage takeover. And, in looking at our site analytics, I was realizing that while our site traffic was exploding, especially during COVID times and all the civil unrest in Chicago last
Mm.
year, people turned to local news in a really big way. So we saw that reflected in our site traffic. But what I was finding is that so many people were clicking directly on a story link or something like that and coming to our site via those channels, but totally circumventing our homepage. So point of entry was really designed to give the homepage takeover experience, that full roadblock, that really lovely brand alignment between an advertiser and a local media outlet. We wanted to have all of those good things, but maximize that visibility. And the product is totally designed to serve to a user right at their first point of entry to the site, regardless of what page that is.
And the level of engagement that we are seeing around the country as we've shifted this strategy from a homepage takeover to I even tell my markets, don't even sell a homepage takeover. I mean, if you can if you want to, but really this point of entry is a homepage takeover on steroids is really what it
Yeah,
is.
I mean that's really exactly it. When you're seeing click-through rates that are 10 or 12 times what you'd see with a homepage takeover, it's really hard to argue with that.
And if I'm not mistaken, and I don't want to take this out of context, one of the advertisers that you did actually saw 2,300 click-throughs back to their website in that day.
Yes,
Yeah,
yep, in 24 hours
in
actually,
24
which
hours.
was absolutely astounding.
Incredible. And then, she doesn't rest on her laurels, Megan. No, no, you'll never see her do that. So then she came up with this crazy idea of how do I implement QR codes into some of our current creative, both for TV and digital. Share with our audience here how this came to fruition.
All right. So, full disclosure, what I will say is my tagline for this concept is good artists create, but great artists steal. Honestly, I didn't come up with the concept of putting a QR code on TV. But what ended up happening was I was home for Christmas last year, and my mother, who is very much, I would say, a representative of her demographic, right? So she's, I would say adults 50 plus, don't tell her I'm telling anybody that, but adults 50 plus, she's very mobily activated in the sense that she's all over social. She's constantly on her phone, on her tablet, but she's still a very loyal news viewer. Local news and then also network news. She's very much a representative of her generation. So I'm always looking at her as like watching her consumer behavior, trying to find touch points and build ideas just based on the way that she interacts with media, the way that she purchases products. She's a great case study. But the thing that was amazing was I was home for Christmas last year, and she was sitting on the couch and we're watching, network news. And she was telling me, I watched this a couple of weeks ago, and I saw a story about a charity that wasn't getting enough donations. And while I was watching, a QR code came up and I was able to scan it and donate on the spot. And she was raving about how easy and wonderful that was. And it was like a light bulb went off. Because I think one of the biggest challenges for broadcast specifically, whether it's from an organic content perspective or from an advertising perspective, we really see the disconnect between on-air viewership connecting to digital content consumption. Are you seeing the same trends in viewership across both platforms? But then also, how are you able to kind of track the viewability of that content? What do the attribution metrics look like? There's always that really big gray area between what's happening on the big screen and what's happening on the small screen. And we have all of these different efforts in place to kind of marry the two. But QR codes, to me, in that one conversation with my mom, it really kind of unlocked something. And I originally wanted to use QR codes in our organic content as an effort to drive more eyeballs to the corresponding website sections. But we actually ended up gaining traction quicker in sales positioning. And so what we ended up doing was layering QR codes. The first time we did it was into a 60-second live read in our morning news hour. And the results were instantaneous, and we kind of just drove it from there. And it's taken on so many different iterations. And essentially the idea is that we want to provide consumers an easy conversion point. We want them to be able to react to the ad message as soon as they see it. And so what we've done is really kind of utilize these QR codes in a number of different positions, and the results have been wonderful.
And one of the things you say often, and I love this, I've kind of adopted this, is no one accidentally scans a QR code.
That's absolutely right.
And in that read, in particular, where you talked about the news read that you had, that was in the lower third of the screen?
It's actually in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Yep. Okay.
It's almost like a picture.
We've utilized, so it's interesting, depending on the ad creative, the thing that I really like about our designers in particular, I'm very blessed, they are very good at finding ways to insert QR codes into video creative in a way that does not interfere with the subject. So luckily for us, pretty easy to do in our live read positioning. That upper right-hand corner is pretty much always available, so nothing to compete with there. But even when it comes to shorter spots or content that is happening on screen, there's a number of different ways to insert that QR code, and it's readable from a distance. So, you're kind of, regardless of the setting and the position on the screen, you're really making it very easy for somebody who is just sitting on their couch watching TV. They could just take out their phone's camera app, scan it, and immediately be directed to whatever content experience that advertiser wants.
Yeah, and we're going to look at the logistics behind the scenes and the dashboard and some of that. But before we get there, I know you've got some slides to share with us. Kind of walk us through how you would take a customer through some of this information.
Realistically, the way that we talk about QR codes, and this one is our particular designer. We work with Flowcode. We love them. Flowcode essentially has this really lovely QR code layout that allows us to build completely customized and branded QR codes. So you can see obviously some recognizable brand names there, but the key is that the function is the same as that black and white QR code that everybody got really used to seeing during COVID.
Yep.
It's the data points, but with the extra added benefit of the fact that it's optimized for whatever environment it's in, whether it's on TV or in printed materials or anything else. The design is specifically created to be functional in its environment. It's about 30% bigger than a standard QR code, and obviously the colors and the some of the animation options and things like that are just really wonderful. So they're great at attracting attention. But beyond that, what's really wonderful about them is just how quick and easy they are to use. So for our purposes, we as a broadcast company are adding them into traditional linear broadcast positioning, but then also on the digital side, we are using QR codes in our connected TV spots, basically any larger format video that you are watching somewhere other than a mobile device, right? Because you have to be able to scan it.
And using that, and because one thing that triggered was the use of using OTT, the streaming services that are out there, putting that ad unit for people to scan that QR code, that gives you immediate online attribution.
Yeah.
So as they're seeing that ad, they're taking action immediately. I mean, this is a bit of a game changer from in the streaming world.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it goes right back to that very intentional action. When you're using something like, broadcast, I love because it's broad. You're casting that really wide net, so you're building this massive audience, which immediately is fantastic from a brand recognition standpoint. But then when you're looking at connected TV as a delivery method for your spots with this QR code in it, you're essentially pre-qualifying your audience because you have the targeting capabilities. So if it's an audience that you're duplicating your message that you have on broadcast and then you're utilizing it in connected TV as well, it's a really great way to kind of drive up your frequency with your most key audiences, whether that's certain zip codes, certain demographics, certain shopping behaviors. But when you're pre-qualifying that audience, you deliver them this message that resonates with them, and then you make it easy and instant for them to learn more about that product. And so when you're thoughtful about where you're placing this video message, where you're placing this QR code, you usually see it immediately represented in your results. And you're right, you can get your scan results within about 15 minutes of airing.
Wow. And let me ask you this, because this came up last week in a market trip when we were talking about QR codes. And the customer wanted to have two different QR codes on the screen. What is I'm wondering if that would be too confusing to have two QR codes. What advice would you give?
No. So this is my thought. If you have multiple creative messages, you should always have a separate QR code for each creative message. And the reason that I say that is it's basically to silo the data from those scans so that you can understand better how people are reacting to your creative in real time. So if you have, perhaps you have two different 15s that are in rotation with two different calls to action. If you're seeing more scans on one version than the other, perhaps that's an indication that the message is stronger in one or the other.
So you're doing, in essence, you're doing A/B testing.
That's exactly right.
Of those creatives. Okay.
And I often do, I recommend, if you have a QR code that's living in different types of media. So if you have broadcast, connected TV, and then perhaps you have some in-store applications or something in your direct mail, whatever that is, different QR codes for each medium as well to help you track and silo your data that way.
So let me ask you, do you think the QR code is going to be the new vanity number? where you can have a different QR code on, running on one station versus another?
I think that could definitely be something we could see happen in the future.
Mm.
The thing that's interesting is that, we love QR codes from the standpoint of being able to see immediate conversion, make conversion, the end result, very, very easy. Now, what the reality of it is that sometimes people aren't ready to make that conversion right at the moment that they see that message. But the secondary benefit of the QR code is the fact that it does have that attribution element to it. So, when the purpose of that vanity number is to track how many people are calling based on that spot. The QR code does a whole lot in terms of being able to tell you when people are actually converting, but also helping you understand when you have the most sit forward audiences in your broadcast environment or in your connected TV environment. You can learn so much about your users just from that standpoint. So I definitely see that could be possible. And I would argue even that the metrics that you gain from your QR code scan are more impressive even than a phone call especially if it's a pre-qualified user and then you're able to see all of their consumer data on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
There's no asking, where did you hear from us anymore? Or where did you hear about us? You actually understand exactly where that person heard about you.
And you've seen some tremendous success. Can we walk through a couple of those? So it looks like what we're looking at, that's one of those news reads, right?
Yes,
that you referenced?
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a product that's very unique to WGN. The WGN Morning News, just to give us a little pat on the back, the WGN Morning News has been the #1 morning news in Chicago for over 10 years now. We beat up on Good Morning America and the Today Show. It's very exciting. And we have just this wonderful, very conversational, very feel-good, recognizable morning news team. And what we did as a way to kind of monetize is, in addition to standard spot in morning news, we actually developed these live reads. And essentially what they are is like a 60-second live commercial. And we essentially have a designated talent who interviews clients, and these are really great for advertisers who are doing events, and essentially anybody who has a story to tell that takes a little bit more than a 15-second spot or something like that. And so this was a very natural first place for us to include QR codes, especially because they're so built around a call to action. They're a very intentional piece of media that are usually designed to drive attention to events or sales or virtually anything. But so there's usually a conversion goal here. So QR codes were definitely a very natural kind of place to put this. And so what we found, was that we were seeing virtually immediate results. So this is a really good example of one that started with a live read, and we liked the results so much that it actually ended up turning into connected TV in multiple markets. And so you can see on the chart here, these analytics are pulled right out of our dashboard with Flowcode. You can see on the left-hand side there, that big spike from our first morning news live read. And this was lovely. It scanned through to a landing page that I was actually able to track the second actions on. And we were able to see that 1,700 scans total turned into 2,200 page views. So people were coming back to this little landing page a couple of times. And then from the landing page, we saw a 41% click-through rate. So 41% of those QR code scanners actually went through and took a secondary action. So they clicked on buy tickets and went to the e-commerce page on the client's website, went back to view the photo galleries, went and clicked on their social media links. And the long and short of it is that, we look at that very intentional action of scanning a QR code, and we see that it's a super qualified audience because of the actions they're taking after that scan. And that's what's kind of most valuable about this, is the information that you're able to see kind of after the fact.
One of the things that stood out to me was that 247 tickets that were sold. That's incredible. And then the other beautiful thing about this is that you can kind of create this a longer engagement because you're giving them places to take second or third actions with that, whether it's going to the website or whatever. I will tell you, in the preview for this QR code discussion, I put that QR code up. My wonderful producer created that for me on the fly, did a great job. And we actually had people who scanned it and started listening to my podcast. So
I love that.
I said, well, I have to thank Megan because that's where the idea came from. So
I love it. I love it. That's exactly what we want them to do.
So let's talk a little bit. I want to circle back to the question of, I know every creative should have its own QR code, but digging into a single creative, we should only have one QR code direction on a single spot, correct? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Any other best practices that you could share with our audience today on QR codes best practices?
We've been playing a lot with retargeting off of our QR code scanners. So one of my favorite things to do is find new and creative ways to apply things that we already have. So like we were saying, QR codes are not, they're not anything new. They just kind of saw this bit of a renaissance over the last 18 months when the entire world went touchless. And so that's really why we got the idea for these. And also, we have always had great experiences with retargeting. We all understand the importance of building frequency with a very key audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so my idea was to kind of marry the two, with the QR code and the subsequent landing page being kind of the linchpin to the whole thing. And so essentially what you're doing is delivering your broadcast message or your connected TV message, whatever that video message is. You're delivering that to a key audience. The most qualified users are taking the very intentional action of scanning that QR code. And then we've built retargeting pixels into these landing pages, which then allow us to maintain a presence across the rest of the internet after that person has scanned a QR code.
And I love that idea because if you didn't get the conversion that you wanted from the initial scan, that you can, obviously continue to travel. And what's a good best practice for a burn pixel? I know someone needs to tell Joseph A. Banks that, yes, I looked at 2 shirts, but I don't want to see an ad on every single website. So I had always heard 3 and free, meaning after the 3rd attempt of a retargeting, maybe do a burn pixel. What do you see as a possible measurement there?
Yeah, I generally kind of feel like it's dependent on the length of your campaign and what your ultimate goals are. I think that, and this is totally just based on personal experience. I know that there are best practices. Sometimes you hear the 3, sometimes you hear 7 these days. I think it probably varies pretty widely from industry to industry and kind of what you're trying to sell. So your purchase funnel might take a little bit longer for a larger ticket item, or something that just takes a little bit more research time. So I may allow for a longer flight and more retargeting impressions in that sense. But if it's something that is lower price point, or something that's a little bit more time sensitive, obviously then you might shorten up your flight and do only a handful of impressions. I'd say never plan on anything less than 3, but then make your other plans based on what the goals are.
Yeah, that's good insight, good advice. And speaking of, one of the things we've discovered in this world, the wild, wild west of OTT, is that unlike traditional television, you need a frequency higher than 3 because that audience isn't always paying attention. They can't skip it, so they may be getting a glass of wine. That's what I'm doing at my house. Run into the restroom, but the commercials are playing. They're still hearing it, because they're not able to skip that. What are you seeing as a best practice in terms of an OTT frequency that you would recommend for a campaign, a decent sized campaign, to put some measurements around that?
Sure. Yeah. So personally in Chicago, when I am looking at a month-long campaign, I'm really looking at, like a 10 frequency over the course of a month.
Hmm.
Now, that could potentially be a little bit high, and you have to be careful with your vendors, especially. If you are working with a partner that maybe isn't very transparent about their frequency capping, maybe isn't very transparent about how those impressions are actually delivered, I definitely say, be careful about, going for a higher frequency. But we are seeing better results in terms of, things like household site visits and QR code scans when we are around that 10 times per month frequency. And so that works out to a little bit less than one time per day if you're looking at that over the course of the month. And really, I would say that 24-hour frequency, you never want to exceed more than like 3 in 24 hours. And unfortunately, it's a really common practice with OTT providers that your average frequency per day might be 3 times, but what you're not really seeing behind the curtain is the fact that it's really one household that's getting 1 million impressions a day, and then anybody else is only getting a couple, and it's all averaged together. So that's a little bit of a sidebar, but a best practice, whether you're using a QR code or whatever your case is, it's always be sure you have walked through that with your vendor to monitor what your frequency looks like.
And giving that example, like State Farm, insurance in general, that'll be in every single commercial break. And what's interesting is that, I am not loyal to a particular platform or a system. I mean, I'm using Apple TV, I'm using Roku, I'm using, I'm going through some apps. I've got Peacock. I mean, I'm all over the map. So in a single evening, I could touch on 3 or 4 platforms and 6 different streaming services to watch my evening of television, which is always way too long. I watch way too much television, but this is why I love working in television. I feel like I love what I do. Thank you for giving us that insight. That was a little special extra that you gave there on that OTT frequency. I think that our users.
I'll get off my soapbox about it.
Oh no! I listen. We like you on that soapbox. We learn when you're on that soapbox. So really appreciate that. So we've talked logistics. We've talked about how these get positioned on that. Anything else QR code related that you're seeing in your market that we could kind of talk a little bit about or talk through?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things, I mean, in general, it's another talking point, but it also kind of summarizes is really that the QR code serves as a key to that really desired audience, right? And so whether it's living in broadcast and you're able to see who's scanning the QR code and kind of what that audience is doing, or it's a pre-qualified audience via connected TV, the thing that is so valuable, it's not only that immediate conversion point, but again, it's those insights that you learn about those users. And so just giving a direction here, I want to say it's probably slide 6.
Slide 6.
One of the things, it's the performance example for our Dad's Day promotion. So I may have rearranged mine. But
and just what you were saying, I always say content is king, but data is its queen. Great content will lead to great engagement and learning more about your customers, as you're going to show us here.
Right. Well, and so that's exactly right. The thing that's really valuable is, looking at the landing page and seeing the secondary action. But then if you look at, your website's Google Analytics, you're able to see some really in-depth metrics about those users because, a QR code works exactly like a link click. It registers on Google Analytics as a click, as a traffic source.
Right.
So it registers like a link click. And so if you apply a UTM code to your QR code, essentially the traffic is entirely measurable. And if you dive into some of those audience segments, you can learn a lot. And so this one is an interesting case because it's an example of a QR code that we ran in a station promotion for our Father's Day contest. The thing that I really found very valuable about this was looking at the age breakout of our scanners. These are the people who scanned the QR code and landed on WGNTV.com. And one of the biggest
So let me
things.
ask you. I didn't mean to cut you up, but
Sure.
how were you able to identify the age group? Is that an action that you asked them to take when they?
No. So you certainly, I mean, it's certainly an option. You can add that into your landing page, but for us particularly, this one didn't have any specific secondary action. We just routed it straight through to the website, and essentially. The way that you can see this information is by going into your Google Analytics and sorting by your source, and then tapping into the user metrics of the users who were delivered by your QR code.
So you're really just looking at the GAM analytics.
Yeah, the Google Analytics platform. Yep.
Okay.
So we sort it and take a look at the ages that are broken out there in the little chart. And the thing that's so interesting is that it's a really wide spread of ages. We see activation across every demographic. And, that's really that very intentional action of scanning that QR code made it very easy for us to identify those people, spot those age groups. And then also, when you add in that retargeting element, you then are adding in all of the additional metrics that you can see about that audience: content preferences, devices they're using, where they're located. I mean, it's really a wealth of information that you can use to optimize your existing campaign and then plan for future ones. Again, you can't stress the intentional action enough. And the fact that user is virtually opting in, virtually, choosing to engage with your brand. And then the information that you can learn from that person, that super qualified user. It's so valuable. So we love QR codes just from so many different standpoints because they have multiple benefits.
I wish you had more passion for this topic.
None at all.
The places you could go if you had more passion. As we kind of wrap up our conversation, and thank you for being so generous with your time. I know that you are very busy. How can people find you, Meghan, if they want to learn more about QR codes or partner with WGN? How do they find you?
Well, so I actually, I have a QR code of my own. So if you would like to connect with me, ask some questions, learn a little bit more, or just test out QR code technology, you can scan the QR code on your screen. Or you can email me at mglenn@wgntv.com or give me a shout on my office line, 773-883-3173. I'm always here and I love to brainstorm.
And I love that you put a QR code in your contact information.
Listen, live it, breathe it, gotta do it. I'm all about it. I have fully had the QR code Kool-Aid.
Well, you're the master. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we go, I always have my final thoughts, and it's some things that I've kind of taken away from our conversation today. And I'd like to read a few of those to you. I liked what you started. It says, "Good artists create and good artists steal." I like that. No original ideas out there. You helped overcome a challenge of our on-air viewers and the disconnect with our digital viewers, and being able to find a product that bridges the two of those together to get that online attribution right away. Nobody accidentally scans a QR code, although I said it. It came from you. Wanted to make sure our audience heard that once again. And then a little extra note there on the OTT, the frequency, 10 times per month, no more than 3 times per 24-hour. Great information. Thank you so much for joining us today, Meghan. And I think we solved yet another mystery, as we do here. I'm the new Sherlock Holmes of marketing. And today we solved another mystery. If you have a mystery that you would like us to solve, feel free to send me an email at mitchell.west@live.com, and we will try to address that in an upcoming episode. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us. Next week, I will be off next week, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. And we're going to be talking about building your personal brand. And my guest is going to be a very successful realtor here in North Texas, also a fellow Hardin Simmons graduate and buddy of mine, Dusty Oglesby will be my guest, and we'll be talking about extending and building your personal brand in the workplace. Until next time, everyone, I'm Mitch West, and this is The Marketing Detective.